And we're back. Thanks for joining me again today. This is your favorite designer, the one will focus. And I'm switching things up a little bit. Most of you who have been following me and on my channel and on social media, specifically in the past, knew that I was an Adobe Illustrator focus person. But I've also expanded into Sketchbook. And I realized that not a lot of people are as familiar with Sketchbook as they could be. Now, if you were to think of Sketchbook in terms of an app or anything that it's similar to, you would probably think along the lines of Procreate, if you're familiar with that. It allows you to develop custom-made brushes and pencils and markers, erasers, smudge tools, etc., like the whole gamut. And I particularly gravitated towards it because of how accurate I can get my line work in Sketchbook Pro. They do have it as a mobile app. I am using the computer version, and they have, both versions available if you wanted to utilize them. And hey, guess what? They're free. It is I believe, the only product that Autodesk offers that is free. It was not originally, but it is now free. And they also offer a variety of brushes that artists have developed and customized for themselves that you can utilize too. But I just wanted to briefly go over some of the options that we have in the program. And then I'll be doing tutorials that'll explain certain techniques and things that you can utilize while in Sketchbook Pro. Okay, so we're going to start in this tutorial. We're only going to cover the items that are in your top bar up here. So your first icon you're going to see is the zoom icon, and it's not just a basic zoom icon. So you can, and in order for me to show you, I'm going to use one of these tools, and I'm just going to draw a shape on the canvas. And when you hit the zoom button, which can also be activated by holding down your space bar, you'll notice that you have 4 arrows on the outside, you have a magnifying glass on the inside, and what looks to be a rotating arrow on the bottom of that magnifying glass on the inside of the 4 arrows. The 4 arrows allow you to move your artboard and canvas around. That does not move the art, but just the canvas. So if you need to move the canvas so that way you can see things a different way, that's how you would do it. This magnifying glass is purely for the canvas. So you would zoom in by clicking and moving to the right or to the left to zoom out. And then if you wanted to rotate the canvas, which is something I absolutely love, a lot of programs do not allow you to rotate the canvas. And if they do, it's not as intuitive and it's not as simple in terms of the speed in which you can do it. So I can rotate this in any way I want all day. It does not change the orientation of it. It is still going to be in a landscape orientation that it started in. And I can just rotate it to get a better handle if I'm using a tablet in order to draw properly. So that's one thing that this does. And you can X out of that. So you have your move arrows to move the canvas, zoom in and out, and rotate the canvas. Okay, so that's what the magnifying tool does. Now there is an actual move tool, right? And you would use the V button on your keyboard. You could hold that down and it'll bring up a similar thing with arrows on the outside. And you'll notice there's a little icon on the top, icon in the middle, which is like a scaling icon, and then one that looks like a rotating icon on the bottom. Now, these two icons, the one in the middle at the top and the one in the very middle, are almost identical. But what it allows you to do is the one on the top allows you to skew independent horizontally and vertically the shape on your or artwork on your board. So if you drag up, it'll skew vertically, and if you let go and you drag left and right, it'll skew horizontally. Now if you wanted it to scale evenly, you would use that in the middle and move right or left, just like you would with the zoom tool. The bottom portion allows you to rotate the artwork, and keep in mind the artboard itself is not moving, and then you can move it with the arrows on the outside. So the V key allows you to manipulate and move around and skew the actual artwork, where the space bar or the zoom tool up top will allow you to manipulate and move the canvas itself. So they're two independent tools that do a similar thing, but just depending on whether you're targeting your artwork or if you're targeting your canvas. Then you have your select tools. So up top you have your select tools. If you were to click that marquee tool, and notice you have a rectangular select tool, you'll have an oval, select tool. Then you have the lasso tool, which you can custom grab. Then you have the magnetic lasso tool, which is, you're using point clicks that create straight lines. And then you can close that shape off, right? And then you have the magic wand, which you can set your tolerance for what it's going to select when you're using it. So if you're selecting a certain color or you're selecting outlines of a shape, you can use that. And you'll notice if you go from any of these, right, they'll continue to keep these additive shapes. If you're familiar with Illustrator, you know what the union tools are, or the Pathfinder tools. This is similar to that, but with selections. So you have your regular replace tool, which means if I were to, and let me undo that. If I were to, let's use this rectangle and select, the replace would mean if I click and I drag again, it's automatically going to get rid of the previous shape and start a new selection. But if I wanted to add to it, I could click the second one, and now it won't go away. It'll just add, and if they intersect, it'll become one whole shape. If I wanted to take away, I would click the remove, and wherever I drag it over, that portion would be removed. Okay, so it's very, 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 very easy. Then you have invert. So right now, it's only selecting this shape, and I'm going to show you what this looks like. So it's only this inner area that it would select, right? But if I wanted it to select everything but that inner area, I could hit the invert selection tool. And now you'll notice the marquee is here on the outside and this portion, which means this is the only thing not selected. And then I could deselect by clicking this. All right. So that's how you would use the selection tool. Very simple. The deselect is also up top as well. Let me just show you real quick. So once you highlight something, you could deselect from there as well. And deselect is also Control D on your keyboard. So very, very, very simple. Let me just get rid of that line that I made. Okay, so then we have our crop tool. Self-explanatory. You can highlight what you want to crop. You can change the size. You can click this actual link button, which means it's proportionate. So that way, if you were to move it or adjust the size, let's see, it will stay scaled to what it was. But if I were to unclick that, I can then grab a corner or a side and I can move it independently, horizontal and vertically. All right, click check. And now it's cropped to that size. I can undo that by Control Z, just like in any program. Then we have the quick transform tool. It's essentially the same thing. We can do a rectangular selection and then we can move things. I don't ever use this, but it's essentially the same thing as when we were using marquee tools, right? You would get the same exact thing. And then the move tool is under there, which we've already covered using the V key as the shortcut button. So we're going to pop forward. Now this is our shear and perspective tool. And I say perspective, but not actual physical perspective, just meaning how you can shear the corners and angles of the artwork. So it'll cover any of the artwork that's there, and you can move left or right to shear and skew the corners of the art to give it a certain perspective. And then you could check it, and it will actually commit the changes that you've made. Don't use this a lot. Only if I want to add a slight skew to change the perspective without going through and redrawing everything would I use that. So then you have your paint tool. This, obviously, you would click and it will fill with whatever your brush puck color is. And in order to change that, you can click in the puck and a little slider will come up. You can slide around it and then change the value on the inside using this little circle marker. So now that we have that, I can click here again. And now I have that color here, right? You also have the ability to use a gradient. And when you do that, you can click and you can drag, right? And if you were to change the colors, you can double click in there, change the color to what you want, double click in the other point. Let's say I want an orange there, and then double click in the last point, and let's say I want a purple-ish, and now I have those as my gradient. Now that's a linear gradient, and then you have the same thing if you chose to do a radial gradient, right? And actually I'll erase this just to get these out the way for now. All right, so we'll start here. Oop. Ignore me. I have to go click that again. So click your paintbrush or your paint bucket fill tool, click the radial fill, and then you click and you drag. Now you have your radial gradient, and then you can double click again change the colors that you want. And let's pick a purple, and I'm going to pick a green. And then you'll notice the radial gradient. So very simple. You can reverse by clicking that, and now it'll invert the gradient, right? And then you can commit. This is, your typical tolerance levels. Everything is the same. It's nothing major. I don't use the tolerance level on gradients. It's not really necessary. So you can leave it at default. And then just click OK, and now you've committed the gradient to that layer, and you'll notice that it shows up on the layer. Again, completely something you could choose whether or not you want to utilize. Then we have our type tool. I almost never use type in this program. Like maybe 1/100th of a percent do I ever use type. But just like any program, this one is less intuitive because it's more of a drawing program. But you would type what you want in the actual window, and you can change the font that you want applied. Highlight it, click the drop down, click the font, click the size, choose if you want it bold, italicize, underline, struck out, and then you can change the actual color of it. Click OK, and it will commit that. And then you can use your scaling tools to change the size if you want it to be smaller or larger than what you originally committed. And I am going to get rid of that because I do not care for that. So I'm going to delete that layer. Let's go. All right. And usually when it's a type layer, just so you know, you have to delete the layer, right? Because it's not actual like artwork. It's not like this layer where I can click the clear or erase button or the delete button. This I have to actually click and hold down in the middle of the layer. Our options will come up and I can delete that layer. All right. So then you have your ruler tool, self-explanatory. You can change the rotation by grabbing one of the ends. You can move the actual ruler by grabbing the middle. And you can change the length you want from the points. You'll notice that the points are indicated by a small dot on the line of the ruler. And if I wanted to click, it will adhere to the restriction of the ruler. I cannot draw outside of that. All right. So if you want to make sure your lines are straight, you could do it that way. The radial tool. You can double click on the scale portion and it will give you a perfect circle, and you can click it and drag and it will stay that way. Or you can independently change the size and shape, right? By clicking the top arrows, which allows you to pinch and bloat, and then you can still scale accordingly afterwards. And then if I pinched it and maybe I didn't want the oval in this direction, I could use a rotate and change the orientation. And just like the line segment tool or the ruler, I can be constrained to this actual shape itself, and I can't draw outside of it. So if you want to, get perfect ovals every time, that's how you would do it. All right. Then, and this tool is interesting. So it's a French curve. Now, with this, you may have certain curves that you want to achieve, and I'm going to erase what I did on the board. But it may not be a perfect circle, or it may curve a little bit differently, and you might want to utilize this to get your edge just perfect. Like so, it does some weird things. You can click and change the type through this button on it, and you can cycle through. And what happens is you can flip it horizontal, vertical by clicking this. And then you can scale just like you did with the others. And then as you go around, of course, it will keep and constrain to those proportions. But you don't need to keep it at that exact shape. So what I tend to do is if I created something on an artboard, I might go around a specific portion of it might have this similar curve. And then I'll just leave that, right? Because it gives me a perfect curve at that specific curvature. All right. And as we move forward now, this is perspective tool. This is an interesting tool. So you have two or 1, 2, 3, and fisheye. So 3 perspective modes and then the fisheye mode. I really like fisheye. It's very unique, but you gotta be accustomed to how they work. I'm not gonna go in depth on these because this would be an extensive tutorial in and of itself. But if you're familiar with perspective, you do know how it works. If I were using the, let's see, I'll use the fisheye tool. You'll notice that my marquee lines, right, will change depending upon how I'm floating around the axis. It's almost like a globe. So when I would draw something, it's only going to go across the portion relevant to where I'm drawing. And you can start it going right to left or up and down. So let me show you going up and down. So if I were here and I went up and down, it would start there. And I can start here and go up and down. Or here. Or here. And you notice how it starts to, just like an old globe, it goes around in those specific lines. I believe they're isometric lines that go around the entire globe. So using these, you can do the same thing with the other perspective lines. And you'll notice how they adhere to that perspective. And like if we were to look at it, this almost makes a perfect triangle. If I wanted to, it would make a pyramid that would appear to be going from the ground up, from a worm's eye view. But anyway, just to give you guys an idea, that's what that tool is for. And you have Symmetry Tools. So Symmetry Tools are just what they sound like. Let me turn the perspective grid off. Symmetry Tools will allow you to make perfect symmetry. All right, so you can do left and right. You can do, well, that was vertical symmetry, and then you can do horizontal symmetry. All right, and they also have radial symmetry. Now, radial symmetry, it's unique because you can decide how many segments you want for your symmetry in and of itself. So I'm going to take these off and I'm going to turn that on. And you'll notice if I make something here, it's going to appear in the other symmetrical segments. Okay, and you can change the amount. Like right now I have 10, which means I'll get 10 of these. But because I was higher up, let's do it in here. And you got it like that. So if you got to make a shape and you got to make it in a pattern, circular, and it has to be a bunch of them, you can utilize this tool to get a lot of the legwork done. Here, this allows you to choose whether or not you can, let me turn this off, start doing something symmetrical and cross over the border in the middle, which you can turn off or on, and you can lock it. And if it's unlocked, you can move it to where you want it to be. But it allows you to choose whether or not you want it to cross over. If you don't and you want it to stop, you can click this and now it will not cross that border. This is only showing me going here, but once I go over here, notice it's not drawing anything. But once I get back here, it starts again. So it looks at where your art brush or tool started, and it says once it crosses that line, I won't let it draw anything until it comes back over that line. Then you have the steady hand tool. This allows you to start developing and drawing a stroke, but it will do it smoothly because it's kind of a delay behind it. And it curves it according to how you're moving by keeping it steady. Now, if I were to turn this off and try and emulate the same thing, you'll notice it's going to show every imperfection of how my hand might be going with this drawing. So that's the difference between the two. And you could change the tolerance. You could lower it. And notice it's not as straight. It's better than mine, but it's not as straight as the original. And then you could raise it, and you'll notice it trails further, but it's even straighter and more clean than the original. All right. Then you have the guess tool. I call it the guess tool because it predicts the shape in which you're making. So if you're making a circle, right, and let's bring this all the way to a 5, the highest, and I were to just go like this, see how it automatically makes that oval shape according to where it thinks I was trying to make it. So if I went like this, it'll then make the oval shape again. So that's what this is. It predicts what it is that you're trying to draw and will smoothen it out for you. And then you have your basic shape tools. No need for us to even go into that. The rest of these aren't needed to be covered right now, but I wanted to give you guys a basic understanding of how the program works. Next time we'll get into the brush puck, we'll get into the size puck, and we'll discuss how you can manipulate these. We'll discuss layering and, you know, custom brushes and things like that. But I'll bring some more tutorials that'll explain some of the work that I've been doing and how I've gotten there with developing. So I hope you guys enjoyed. If you have any questions or you want to see a tutorial, feel free to ask, and I will talk to you guys next time. Bye.